Good to be with you. We're going back to Georgia now for the end. The last words in the Melody Farris case before the jury gets this case and starts deliberating her fate.
It could happen at any moment. Melody Farris is accused of shooting and killing her husband, a prominent attorney in Atlanta, Gary Farris. And then they say she burned his body on a fire pit on the property. But her defense has been telling this jury that no, she did not do this. Their son, who they called a freeloader, was the one who killed his father. And Scott is inside of this courtroom, inside of the gallery. We just saw the defense show this jury those fertilizer bags, 300 pounds worth, that was hard for the attorney to carry.
Yeah, now the question is, how will the state react in its rebuttal? Will they bring up this problem with their case or move on to other things? Let's watch together.
There was one thing that Melody Farris was very good at, and that is betraying everyone close to her. I went through testimony of her children in this case, even Amanda. She tore our family apart. Mom became hostile, aggressive, demanding money. Even Amanda said, there was manipulation. I should have been more angry at her. And Chris Farris, when he was asked, how do you feel about your mom committing this crime when your daughter was possibly at home? I think it's sick and twisted. He didn't say, oh, I don't think she would do that. These are her children. But as you sit here, she is trying to blame them for this crime. Those are her kids. Let that sink in. She has thrown both her sons, a son-in-law, under the bus for this crime. The murder of her husband, who she betrayed the most. She didn't only take away their father, but she took away a grandfather. She took away a big part of Bern Foreman. But the only thing he was to her was in the way. When she's faced with the reality and the consequences of what she did, the first thing she does, serves up her kids on a silver platter, parades it all around the courtroom. But the evidence in this case doesn't point to a single one of them. This is Gary. He is not a pile of bags of fertilizer. He's a man. It's offensive to compare man to bags of dirt. Now the defense wants you to believe she's just the unluckiest woman ever. There was blood found in her home. There was a bullet found in her home. She was framed. It was planted. That's not reasonable. She just happened to also be having a long-standing affair with a man who's searching for wedding rings less than a week before Gary Farris is murdered. They want you to think that's a coincidence? Man, they're in for it, because there's a long list of coincidences if that's the game they're playing. if that's what they're trying to get at. Not only that, but she just so happened to be taking care of a woman who owned a .38 snub-nose revolver in a leather holster that her son saw in the basement of her home. Another coincidence? No, ladies and gentlemen, that's called evidence. They want you to think there's an individual, innocent, reasonable explanation for all of the incriminating evidence against her. That it's a giant conspiracy. That the gunshot wounds didn't kill him? Use your common sense and reason. Now let's briefly talk about Scott, then we're going to get into the evidence that incriminates Melody Farris. When you think about Scott Farris, think about the manner in which he testified. Think about how he was corroborated, not only by the witnesses in this case, but the digital evidence. The digital evidence proves he was truthful about everything he did that weekend, that week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And he's corroborated by Martha Barton, because you know what? He didn't know that Martha Barton had a gun, a .38 snub-nose revolver in a leather holster. And a huge piece of evidence, he knew Melody the best. He knew his parents. He knew their dynamic. He knew that Melody never had a credit card. He knew that Melody was angry. He was there when she slammed that plate down and said, God, I can't wait till the day he's dead. He saw that. The day before his father was murdered. He knew.
We're hitting the pause button on this testimony, not testimony. We're in closing arguments. Yeah. There's no more testimony, no more evidence. This is all that the jury is going to be hearing. And I'm wondering, I'm listening for whether or not the state is going to own that maybe they don't know where Gary Farris was killed.
I don't think so. And I think they did a great job of deflecting by, instead of addressing the how did she move a 300-pound person, they deflected by saying how dare they compare this man to a bunch of dirt and fertilizer. And that might hit home with a few jurors, and then you move on. But I think back in the jury room, that jury's going to have to address it.
They are, and they are going to, I think, weigh the evidence against both, even though they really should just be looking at Melody's case and whether or not the state proved it. I think they are going to look at the evidence against Scott, the evidence against Melody, and see which one they think did it. And I think that is actually a heavier burden than they should be tasked with.
And it's a gamble for the defense, because if at the end of the day everybody agrees, I don't think Scott did it, then boom, Melody might go down. We'll see. Seems like there's a lot of reasonable doubt. The state still has some time left before the deliberations start. Let's get a break, and then we'll pick up more of the rebuttal closing argument from the state of Georgia. Stay with us.
The trial of a wife who's accused of killing her husband and then burning his remains.
Defendant murdered and desecrated her own husband.
The Burn Pile Murder Trial. Live coverage today on Court TV.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, 12 men and women unpack the Farris family drama as deliberations get underway in the Burn Pile Murder Trial.
Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan tonight at 8, 7 Central, only on Court TV.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. Let's go back to the trial of Melody Farris happening in Cherokee County, Georgia.
She's accused of killing her husband, Gary, back in 2018, then burning his remains on the burn pile on the property. Prosecutors say the couple had a horrible marriage. Melody ultimately killed Gary for money and freedom so she could be with boyfriend Rusty.
If she's convicted, she could face life in prison for her crimes. Her defense, of course, is that someone else did it, and they pointed the finger at her son, Scott, who was there inside of the courtroom, never been charged with anything in this case. Let's go back in. We're listening to the state's rebuttal, their final word to this jury.
And he would get caught in the middle. He just wanted to bury his head in the sand and be like, let me do my work, keep me out of the marriage problems. But the second he knew his father was in that burn pile, they want to get on him for taking charge. You know what you learn in the military? To take charge. To take action. That's all he knew. That was ingrained in his mind. We need to call 911. We need to get the girls out of here so they're not traumatized for the rest of their lives. And we need to get to the bottom of this and get to the truth. Let's talk about lack of motive for Scott. He was completely relied. He completely relied on his father for everything. His livelihood, the place he lived, the money. Why would he take that away? He would have nothing left. Melody would kick him out immediately. He also knew, forgot to mention, Melody disappeared every week to go see Rusty. He knew that. One of her motives. And he didn't have access to a .38 revolver or own one. Think about this. Scott committed this crime. There's no way she wouldn't know about it. She was home the whole time. Law enforcement didn't blue star the barn because nobody saw blood in the barn. They blue starred where there was physical blood. No blood found in the barn. They didn't have to. The bullet was in the house. Gary was on the burn pile.
This is what happens when you leave a plate. Forget to take it upstairs. A minor temper tantrum. Of course, I had supper tonight, and it was 6 for me, so I'm sure I'll be feeling poorly here within minutes. But we'll see.
There was testimony about Gary talking about Melody poisoning him. We didn't admit that or get that in evidence because we think he was poisoned. That shows his state of mind. That shows he knew Melody would kill him if it came down to it. She's the only one that would have. And he knew she wanted him dead. She's clearly poisoning me. Supper was fixed for me. I'm probably gonna feel bad. And that was after her slamming that plate down on the ground in frustration because he left a dirty plate in the theater or his bedroom or wherever. It's not normal behavior. That corroborated Scott. So, this might be because I'm a millennial, but I always read that first line as, do you have my credit card? Because my phone always fixes due to so, and it just irritates me. but read it however you wish. Gary to Scott, do you have my credit card? So you have my credit card. Choose one. Yes. Hang on to it as if your life depended on it. Is that what you tell someone who you want to cut off? No. That's what you tell someone you trust to keep the credit card away from her.
Prosecution, they're having to lay it out. They're having to exonerate Scott in front of this jury.
Right, and which, you know, they definitely have to do that. I'm still worried about the 300-pound thing in terms of how do they address that, and how does the jury deal with that?
It seems like they're ignoring it. They're
yeah.
just making it theatrics. They're bringing up good stuff like the poisoning. That's something that kind of got buried in the evidence. The defense didn't really focus on that as well.
She's not a very lovable defendant. You know, she's not a great mom, not a great wife, cheating, and it's just a weird, and her demeanor is, other defendants sometimes you're like, oh, yeah, you're not getting that with her.
She didn't take the stand, which of course they can't hold against her, but I do think they would have gotten more from Melody if they could have heard from her. We have to get to a break. More from the state after this. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julia Janae. Thank you for following along with us this afternoon as we watch the closing arguments in the case against Melody Farris, the burn pile murder trial happening in Cherokee County, Georgia. The fate of Melody Farris is soon going to be in the hands of a jury, and she faces life in prison if she's found guilty of fatally shooting her husband, a prominent Atlanta attorney, Gary Farris. She's also accused of burning his remains on their property to the point of almost undistinguishable remains. But the defense points to a dysfunctional family dynamic and has even been referred to by someone in this family as the Ferris wheel, almost a Ferris wheel of drama by some. And they say that Gary and Melody's son Scott in particular had the means and the motive to kill Gary. Scott is sitting inside of this courtroom as his mother's defense has pointed the finger at him as the suspect. What we're listening to now is the state's final response, the rebuttal closing argument in front of this jury. Let's go in right where we left off.
Probably a little too much for this dynamic for him, between him and Melody. Probably shouldn't have gotten Scott involved, but here he is. He lives on the property. It's natural. He says, okay, and then he says, she makes me go shopping with her because she keeps saying the other card is turned off, her debit card. The girlfriend of her boyfriend, Rusty Barton, sent me several disturbing emails last night. This is in October of 2017. She is spending dime of my money. Either she is spending every dime of my money or she won't spend every, I don't know. Something about spending his money. Things will change dramatically. You need to pursue a job soon. He's not telling Scott to pursue a job because he wants him off the property. He's telling Scott to pursue a job because something's about to go down. He about to leave her. He's had it. But this was almost a year before his death. Melody wanted everyone to believe after Gary was murdered that Scott was some big, scary dude that everyone should be afraid of because he's got PTSD or whatever, and he's just a big guy, so you should fear him. She even had Amanda and Chad change locks on that house. But if you go through these text messages, which is S. Ferris 5, State's Exhibit, it's all their text messages post-offense when they were living on the property together. You know what she did? She relied on Scott. She left him keys under the rug to get into the house, but then turned around and told people he stole stuff out of the house. If that's not two-faced, if that's not malicious, I don't know what is. That's your own son. You don't leave a key under a rug for someone you think wants to kill you or frame you. Or someone you think killed your husband. Oh, keys on the rug. Come on in. One more thing about Scott. Mr. Fogus mentioned the oath we take as prosecutors. It is our duty to uphold the law without fear, favor, or affection. There is no evidence that points to Scott in this case. You don't think if there was evidence Scott did something in this case that he wouldn't be sitting at that table with Melody? Sure make our job easier. I'm not going to indict someone where there's no evidence he committed a crime. Let's talk a little about the Farris family history. In the beginning of this trial, y'all probably were wondering why we walk through every child's history and experience growing up in all these different houses and states, and what their dad was like when they were younger, what their mom was like when they were younger. Then you realized how far back and how deep this goes. This is not a simple family. This is not a simple case. But in order to fully understand the dynamics of this family, you had to hear all of that history. You know that this is from Emily's wedding. I want to talk about a little bit of build-up to the day of July 3rd, 2018. You've got Ted Wiley, that affair, about 8 years before Gary's death. That changed the dynamic of Gary and Melody's relationship greatly. He totally took her off the finances. He was like, you want to take out all of the money I had set aside for taxes? Great, I'm going to take you off all the accounts. You want to come back and try to work this out? Come home. Leave Ted, who, by the way, was dating Gary's sister for like 20 years before she decided to hook up with him. 2010, he dismissed the divorce that he filed. Martha Jane had her surgery in 2014. Okay? The kid said that things seemed fine between 2010 and 2014. Seemed fine. Martha Jane had her surgery, and that's when the affair begins with Rusty Barton. Emily's wedding was 2 years later. She flaunted that relationship in front of people that night. She didn't care. She had no conservative spirit about that whatsoever. And Gary had to pretend like it didn't bother him that night because his daughter was getting married. It was supposed to be the best night of her life, but you know who couldn't help but make it about her? Melody Farris. Chris testified that Gary was so upset, he said, that's the last time Melody's going to embarrass me. Then you have in 2016, Martha tells Melody about the location of her revolver. You also have in 2016, Melody telling Gary, I hope you die alone and a gruesome death. And remember, Terry Braswell, this was Terry Braswell's phone, and he had her burner phone number. This was a phone she thought nobody would ever see the inside of. She's not saying that type of stuff on her 9029 number. And then Terry says, he's gonna push you over the edge. And she says, I know, and that scares me. I told him finally to go where could not even see or hear him. It would be in his best interest. She knew she had no self-control. She hated him that much. September 2017, she gallivants out to Jamaica with Rusty. Meanwhile, she sends her debit card through the mail to Sherry Cooper to run it in Minnesota because she told everybody she was in Minnesota. Poor Sherry, she had some guilt about that. She was like, I don't know why I did that. That was stupid. Don't forget, Melody betrays every person and uses every person close to her for her own benefit. She even, you saw, and I've already mentioned this, you saw Amanda's reaction to those text messages. Oof. She did not like being used like that. Gary receives an email from Christina Grant. Just FYI, your wife and Rusty Barton have been lovers for 3 years. I'll give it. No, I'm supposed to black out Miss Grant's email. Sorry. I'll give it to her. She's the only one who's bringing this to light. Everyone else sweeping it under the rug. Christina's like, nah, y'all ain't gonna get away with this. Mm-mm. That's when Gary texts Scott about the credit card. Hang on to it as if your life depended on it. March 2018, Gary sends Melody this text message. Your profligate spending must stop. He says in the middle there, between you, Chris, and Scott, I can't keep up. You treat me like I don't exist, which is offensive, typo, my typo, given how you repeatedly betray me. Gary's in the hospital in April of 2018. Meanwhile, she's telling Rusty Barton he has like esophageal cancer and he's spitting up blood and he's on his deathbed. Even Chris said she made it sound like he was bad. And then he shows up to the hospital and Gary's like, what's that look on your face for? And he's like, I thought you were like real bad. And he was fine. He walked out of the hospital, went back to his Mountain Dew. And that's when he tells Chris, you know, I think Melody's poisoning me. Again, that goes to his state of mind. This was all amping up. He knew something was off. June was a big month, 2018. June 6th, DirecTV comes to the house, and yes, please look at those chats, because Gary says, hey, come to the house real quick. I need to show you the issue so you know what issues when they get here. That's when DirecTV comes, that's when Scott sees that pistol. Again, this corroborates Scott.
The prosecution here highlighting the hate, the animosity between this wife and husband before Gary Farris was killed. Let's get to a break and we'll get you back in for more in the Melody Farris trial, closing arguments, and we're getting really close to this jury getting this case. We are in Georgia for the trial of a wife who's accused of killing her husband and then burning his remains.
When you see the opportunity and the motive, money, sex, new life.
Gary Farris was a very prominent Atlanta attorney.
It is common knowledge that they had affairs. Defendant murdered and desecrated her own husband.
The Burn Pile Murder Trial. Live coverage today on Court TV.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. We are watching closing arguments this afternoon in the Burn Pile murder trial. This mom of four is on trial, Melody Farris. She's accused of shooting her husband in the basement of their home and then burning his body in a burn pile in their yard. She is facing a jury and she faces up to life in prison. Her children are in the gallery watching as this case is winding down. Her defense says that the 64-year-old, who would have been 58 at the time, wouldn't have been able to move her husband's 300-pound body. It says that it was her sons that had a financial motive to kill their father. Let's get you back into the court now. We're listening to the state's rebuttal closing arguments, so the last words that this jury is going to hear before they go into the deliberation room.
He knew when he saw it. He was like, actually, I was looking for a remote, which makes perfect sense. He's looking in drawers for the remote to figure out the TV, for the TV guy. That's completely reasonable and natural. He's opening drawers and he's like, oh, that's weird. A gun that looks just like the one Martha Barton described. June 25th. Rusty searches in his phone, plain gold wedding band. And you'll see text messages from Melody to him. Plain gold wedding band, that was their thing. And then Gary's birthday, Jenna sees a revolver. Jenna has no dog in this fight. Her and Chris aren't even together anymore. They don't talk. She has no dog in this fight. She didn't want to be here talking about this. No motive to lie. Then on June 28th, Melody learns about the beach trip, which is supposed to be that Saturday. That's also not a coincidence. Then the text messages. To Emily and Amanda. These are two separate messages that she sent to two separate people expressing how angry she was that Gary got a condo for Chris and Jenna. Not a reasonable reaction. She was over it. I'm taking measures to stop this insanity. No one thought these would be the measures. But here we are. Because the next day, Gary's murdered. Again, not another coincidence. Let's talk about her motive. That first text message, I was shocked when Sherry told me you had a boyfriend, but don't blame you. From Terry Braswell to Melody. Plain gold wedding band. That's when he searches on his phone. Rusty does. This note, Crown XO, March 31st, 2014. She made a note in her phone about Rusty's favorite drink. So we know that corroborates the timeline of their relationship. And then these messages on the side here from August 4th and 5th, that's between her and Rusty. That's a month after her husband was found murdered and burned on a burn pit on her own property, who she claims that her son killed. Meanwhile, she's over here. Forever, we need us. I need you. All. don't get more motive than that. Except she had more. All right. This is all the money she would get if Gary died accidentally. Add all those up. Okay, $4.15 million now. The defense wants you to believe she didn't know about it. You know what you do know? You know that she goes in his phone when he's not around. You know that she cleans that house. You know she's not stupid. She knew about his profit sharing. She called the office and asked about it. She knows where that money goes. She, again, consider the source. She is going around pretending like she's asking Emily, what am I going to do? What am I going to do if something happens to your dad? They're the ones that stood up here that said his money is her money. We all know that's true when you're married. It's either going to go to her or the kids. Probably all four. Naturally, without a will, that house was hers. You cannot tell me she thought she was going to be broke. It's ridiculous. Afterwards, it was always about money, money, money. Melody was demanding money. She was trying to get as much money as possible. She didn't think that when he was found dead, all the finances would be frozen. She didn't think they found a bullet in his rib either. I was terrified I would be broke. Ma'am, your husband's a millionaire. And here we have it, the condo. This is Hayes 55. Did you talk to Chris about this beach trip? What beach trip? He wants to take the girls down there the weekend after the 4th. Let him take them. I haven't gotten past him standing on my porch telling me he was going to beat me unrecognizable, and then only time he wanted to see me again was when they put me in a box in the ground. Or that he continues to take money every month, of which you do nothing about. She's blaming Gary for that. There is something terribly wrong with not being able to take a beach trip with the grandkids without so much drama. I guess such a trip.
So much drama. Even one witness on the stand who is in this family calling it the Ferris wheel of drama, I would add. Let's bring in our criminal defense attorney, Eric Puryear, who is standing by watching these closings. We are getting close to the jury getting this case. Really different cadence and presentation style from all of these attorneys. This is the 4th attorney that these jurors have heard delivering closing arguments because we had 2 defense attorneys, Eric. But your thoughts on the prosecution's focus on the money and the marriage problems as really the biggest part of their case?
I think that focus is well placed here, helping the jury understand the reasoning behind it, all of that emotion, all of that drama, and how that could lead a person to commit a murder, I think is that piece that the jurors need to hear if they're going to convict. And I think the focus is well on making sure to talk about why it is that this defendant is on trial alone, why her son is not sitting next to her, is something that the jurors are going to wonder, and by heading that off in advance, the state does help their case there.
In comparing it to the defense, do you think that they have addressed enough of the items that the defense brought up in their closing? In particular, they listed out all of the things that they felt were similar motives for Scott, and that really dramatic moment where they dragged in the bags of fertilizer to show that Melody Farris would have had a very difficult time dragging 300 pounds up steps and out to a burn pile with her small stature.
And that is an interesting question there. It's so hard to think, how are each of those jurors going to receive that? The fertilizer bags, that sort of pageantry or theater really can carry the day in court sometimes. But I think that ultimately the state is focusing more on the logic of it, more on the motive and less on the mechanics, in the hopes that the jurors think that way as well. And I guess we will soon see.
Do you think it's a problem, Eric, that these jurors may literally be putting Melody and Scott next to each other in that deliberation room and trying to figure out where the weight is? Is there more against one versus the other? Do you have any issue with them doing that, or do you think that that is beyond what they should be doing if they're supposed to be looking at the state's case against Melody and whether or not it has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt?
I think it is fair for the jurors to consider that. The jurors should hold the state to proving each and every element of their case beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense doesn't have that burden. The state has a heavy burden, as it should in every criminal case. And for the jurors to consider all of that is right on their part. And if the prosecution has the facts and has done their job, then even that comparison won't prevent the proper conviction verdict from being returned if there's guilt here.
Eric, we're going to listen to more of the state's rebuttal. We're going to get to a break and go right back in where we are leaving off. Stay with us. You're watching Court TV Live. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julia Janae. We are in Cherokee County, Georgia, right now for the burn pile murder trial against Melody Farris. She's facing life in prison for allegedly killing her husband, Gary, and burning his body in a burn pile. And prosecutors cite money as the motive in this case. The defense says other people had money motives, including the couple's son, Scott, who lived on the property. And in his apartment, they found the same kind of ammunition that was found in the remains of the decedent, Gary Farris. Let's get you back into court now. We're hearing the state's rebuttal closing argument from Prosecutor Frankish.
Man, he knew his wife, didn't he? July 2nd. I got Gary's phone. He booked and paid for the condo for Chris and Jenna. I'm beyond furious. Amanda, oh, big surprise. Right, always there in her mom's corner. I had to put the times on this one because this is ridiculous. Melanie, did you book a condo for Chris and Jenna? Trying to, like, trap him? It's your husband. Be like, hey, I got your phone, so you booked this condo. You don't want to talk to me about that? Actually, he did talk to you about it. He invited you on a trip. You said no. I booked one for me and the girls as well. That's how manipulative and conniving she was. And you remember, in Lindsay Harris's presentation, you saw the group chat among Amanda, Gary, and Melody about she was making a photography appointment. Amanda, she invited both her parents, and Gary said, I'm going to the beach. Melody chats her on the side. This is your time to ask him. Thanks for the invite. Manipulation, conniving, deceit. That's what she's about. Again, these text messages. The top one is a little bright. It's Melody to Emily. I have had it. I'm taking measures to stop this insanity. This was July 2nd. That's her message to Amanda Farris. This is the last straw with him. All right. I want to get into the timeline of events. These phone calls. These are all the phone calls that she had with Rusty on the 3rd in the evening. I didn't go before that. We know Chris and Addison stopped by the house in the evening. We know Gary went out to eat and came home around 9:30. And don't forget, John Lambert heard gunshots between 9 and 10 p.m. that night. They talked for an hour and 14 minutes at 11:45 p.m. But they talked for 5 minutes at 11:28. The call in between that is the one to Scott, 11:34, when Scott calls when he gets back home. Because, you know, she has to tell Scott to come home. She calls him and she's like, what time are you going to be home? The horses got out. And I want you to think about this. In her statements to Detective Hayes and Detective Kuykendall, she talks about these horses getting out. I think it starts like before dinner. And then it starts with like one horse, right? And then for some reason she's still chasing horses 3 hours later, but then it goes to two horses. And then she's like, oh, but then the third one got out after that. Inconsistent. You weren't chasing horses. You were murdering your husband. She had to call Scott because she didn't know what time he'd be home. She had to call Scott to see what time he'd be home. Because then, when she says, well, the horses got out, and he's like, okay, I'm coming home. She's like, well, I got them put up. Okay, then why are you calling? It doesn't make sense. The horses are a cover-up. When she calls Scott, Scott's all the way up there at the lake. She calls him at 10:52. What time are you gonna be home? All those calls with Rusty in between. I want to talk about this notification. At 12:24 a.m., the morning of the 4th, so the night of the 3rd, the night Gary is killed, she uses her debit card to purchase minutes on Straight Talk. Y'all heard a lot of testimony. 1, about how she doesn't have a credit card. 2, about how Gary would get financial alerts for all of her purchases. Lindsay testified, Ms. Harris, testified. This was the only alert that popped up in his email, in his phone, for Straight Talk. That's not a coincidence. She knew Gary was dead. So using her debit card to blast that she has a Straight Talk phone, not a problem.
She said, Gary is in the burn pile. No, she said, he is in the burn pile. And I said, what? And she said, he's in the burn pile. And I said, do not say another word and do not tell me anything. I do not need to know.
That's what that 220 call was about. Now, again, believe what you want about Rusty. We all know he knew more than he came in here and told you. We all know that. We're not stupid. They talked for an hour and 35 minutes at 11 whatever, and then another 35 minutes at 2:20 a.m. But that's all he was willing to give. But that's enough. And you know that that's how it happened because he gave you the context and he told you when that call happened. Mr. Ray talked about Detective Botsong using this open source document or program for the CPAP machine. All right, the date is the 3rd. It ends at 7:48 a.m. That's the last.
Using that recording of Rusty's voice there to show that 2:30 a.m. call when no one else would have known that Gary Farris was on the burn pile. And Rusty initially told police, Melody called me and told me that's what happened. I think that is the biggest evidence this prosecution has against Melody, and it's the hardest one to explain away. Let's take a break and we'll get you back in for more after this. Trial of a wife who's accused of killing her husband and then burning his remains.
Defendant murdered and desecrated her own husband.
The Burn Pile Murder Trial. Live coverage today on Court TV.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, 12 men and women unpack the Farris family drama as deliberations get underway in the Burn Pile Murder Trial.
Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan tonight at 8, 7 Central, only on Court TV.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. We are watching closing arguments underway in Georgia right now for the Burn Pile murder trial. Melody Farris is accused of killing her husband, Gary, and throwing his body on a burn pit on their property back in 2018. We're hearing from the state as they give their final rebuttal argument to this jury. One of the last things they're going to hear in this trial before they go back into the deliberation room to decide the fate of Melody Farris. Let's pick it up right where we left off.
Yeah, for that CPAP machine, for Gary Farris going to sleep. Now, you got the raw records too. Look at that. Oh, 7:48 a.m. It's the same. The data, the raw data, shows he never, ever went to sleep the night of the 3rd. Now, I want to talk about this map. All right. Got a little bit. All right, see where that dot is? And that's Gary's phone. The morning of the 4th at 6:37 a.m. till 7:21 a.m. Right there at that burn pile. We know Gary's dead. And we know it goes from the house to the burn pile. You'll have that with you in the jury room. And then it goes back to the house. $7:58, $8:21, $9:05. It's back at the house. She's on the phone with Rusty all morning. And you know Scott's location during this time, it's in here. He left for the lake. He was 20 minutes away. The only one home was Melody. That phone was either on Melody or on Gary's dead body. But you know who wasn't there? Scott. And Melody was by herself. You know Rusty wasn't there because she's on the phone with him the whole time. Well, and you heard testimony that he was actually in Tennessee, but also. We know what time she left for the lake. She left 12:47 p.m. She puts that location Amanda sends her into her maps and heads out to the lake. Now, the thing about Dr. Pope's testimony in that 24-hour window is she said that that was dependent upon the fuel. And you heard testimony that that burn pile was huge. You know what she did? She lit that burn pile and she left. The 3 calls with Rusty Barton the evening of the 3rd and the morning of the 4th total more than the other 15 calls that they've ever had between those hours. Again, that's not a coincidence. She was freaking out because she just killed her husband and had to figure out what to do with him. You know who she turned to? Rusty. What do I do? Yeah, I'm going to talk about her activity. The 3rd, the 7th, September 7th, 2017, September 30th, 2017, and the 3rd, July 3rd, 2018. Those are the 3 days she had the most activity between. This is a 1 hour period, 1 hour, from 11 p.m. to midnight, okay? Now, we talked about Jamaica, the one on the 7th, that was probably a data dump, okay? All right, fine, let's get rid of it. 2. The 2 most active nights she has ever had in a year are gallivanting about Broadway when she's out in Nashville with Chad and Amanda, and the night she murdered her husband. That tracks. That makes sense. That's reasonable. This is also not a coincidence. I want to talk about the money. We know Melody didn't have a credit card. The only card she had was a debit card. And that card is the one that ended in 0078. The one Scott used at that ATM that morning that he got from the house and brought back. Okay, there's that ATM withdrawal. That's the one he brought back to his mom. Even Melody says about Scott, and he has a credit card. I don't even have that. We know that. That 0078 card is her only card. Until law enforcement empties her wallet. That card on the right, ending in 1727. That's the card Gary got mailed to his office less than a month before his murder. That was a new credit card. That's his office address and that Bank of America activity alert. And that's her transaction at Walmart the morning of July 5th, before Gary's remains were discovered. Oh yeah, by the way, the trip to Walmart that she doesn't mention to police ever, that she says she's literally interviewed on the 5th and on the 6th, leaves it out, says she's just, I don't know, cleaning up after the girls, lays in bed. Why don't you talk about this trip to Walmart?
We are approaching the top of the hour, so we're going to hit the pause button on this rebuttal case and get some analysis from our criminal defense attorney guest who is standing by, Eric Puryear. Eric, I was just noticing before we hit the pause button, there was this colloquy of sorts between the defense attorney and his client, Melody Farris, during the rebuttal argument in front of this jury. What do you think about that? Is that unusual for there to be this commotion inside of the courtroom during the closing?
Yeah, generally when I'm talking to clients as we're getting ready for closing and jury deliberation, I tell them how important it is to make sure we have the right body language, to make sure that we are presenting ourselves in the best manner possible. And anything that looks like it's a distraction or suggests that there's confusion or anything else, we like to avoid. We don't want to do anything that might cause a juror to have a negative opinion. And so I'm not sure what exactly that was about, but it just isn't the approach that I generally like to see, but there could be good reason for it.
Could be a good reason, and we've already seen some more relaxed measures inside of this courtroom, especially from the defense. We even had the defense attorney have to address it in front of this jury, explaining why Melody Farris doesn't stand, saying that we told her not to stand when you come in because you're her peers. Eric, real quick, I didn't get to ask you about that because you were not on the show yet when that happened, but would that be something you'd ever advise a client to do, even if it's a very relaxed setting inside of that courtroom?
Absolutely not. I want my clients to exude concern and respect for the jurors, for the process. I want my client to be likable by the jurors, and anything that suggests that we are anything but deferential to those jurors is just counterproductive as far as I see it.
This trial is pretty unique. Just watching the reaction from our viewers and those of us here at Court TV watching along, it feels like a true murder mystery. Eric, the defense closing sounded as compelling as we're hearing from the state. Your thoughts on where this is going to fall?
It is a tough one. This is not an easy case, but I think that the evidence slightly favors the state here, especially when we look at the electronic records here, and so I think that's the direction it's probably going to go.
And very soon this is going to be in the hands of the jury. Eric Perrier, thank you so much for all of your analysis this hour. We have more closing arguments in the murder trial for Melody Farris, plus Matt Johnson is going to join us from that area with a live update.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Judge Ashley Wilcott, of course, honored to be with you. We are in Georgia this afternoon, where the fate of Melody Farris will soon be in the hands of the jury. The mother of 4 faces life in prison if she is found guilty of fatally shooting her husband, prominent Atlanta attorney Gary Farris, and then she allegedly burned his remains on their property. But the defense points to the dysfunctional family dynamic, which has even been referred to as the Ferris wheel by some, and say that Gary and Melody's son Scott in particular had the means and the motive to kill Gary. Joining us now is our own Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson. Matt, you've been there live. You're there live today. These closing arguments, get us up to speed, if you would, about highlights from the prosecution's closing arguments first.
Judge Ashley, nice to see you. So it took 6 years to get to this point, more than 44 witnesses over 4 weeks, and we're finally here. It is a packed courtroom there in the Cherokee County Courthouse here behind me. Melody Farris paying close attention to those jurors who will be deciding her fate and whether or not she killed her husband of 38 years, Gary Farris. Powerful closing arguments as the state puts a punctuation mark on their case that they've built. 3 Farris children in the gallery, Chris, Scott, and Emily, breaking down at times. Amanda noticeably absent. She was a defense witness as prosecutors tell the jury that money was the motive and Melody killed her husband. Take a listen.
She despised Gary. She hated that he was giving away their money, her money. That was the main motive. Rusty was a bonus. She was mad about that money. She burned the remains of her husband for almost 39 years in the hopes it would look like an accident. All because she wanted his money and to live a life with Rusty.
I was in the gallery a couple rows back from the Farris children, the Farris family consoling each other. This is the first time since they were on both witness lists that they could actually interact since the length of this trial. They've just left the courtroom holding hands, these Farris children that are in there, but they were breaking down at times when prosecutors were saying that Melody Farris would do anything to throw her kids under the bus to keep herself from behind bars. Judge Ashley?
It's got to be hard to hear, even if you might think it in your own head as one of those children. All right, Matt, what stood out to you about the defense closing arguments?
These were powerful moments from the defense team and quite unexpected. At first, we couldn't understand why there was bags and bags of fertilizer near the edge of the well of the courtroom. And then one by one, the defense attorney started to place them down, slamming them down as he made points that the he says that the state has reasonable doubt and that the jurors should pay attention. And then it became very clear that he was stacking up what would be 320 pounds, which was the weight of the victim. And here's how he did a demonstration that was very powerful. Take a listen.
We do have a lot of unanswered questions. So what are just some of those? The questions that have no answers in this case. How about the easiest one? Where was Gary shot? All right, if you remember from that drawing from Dr. Gooding, and I'll show it later, he could have been shot here, but she also said he could have been shot here. They don't actually know where he was shot. They don't have an entrance wound. They don't have a wound path. They don't have an exit wound. And in fact, and I'll go over it more later, Dr. Arden stated that the bullet is lodged in the soft tissue, never entered the body cavity. In that fact, that bullet that they found in the burn pile, there's no way that it would cause death. It would cause some bleeding. He said it could possibly bruise a lung. But in his medical opinion, it's impossible that that bullet caused the death. How was he put on the burn pile? This trial started out, it was a week of establishing the fact that they have a tractor. And there are now hundreds of photographs of a tractor and an RTV. But how did he get on there? And we'll go through what the tractor and the RTV shows. Where is the gun? No idea. How about where are the bullets? No idea. Scott's odd behavior, and I'll talk more about that shortly. How did Gary even die? How was he put on the burn pile? Where is the gun? How about where are the bullets? Scott's odd behavior. How did Gary even die?
So the defense using their point and their time to really try to poke holes in the state's case at this point in time, and also still pointing the finger at the Farris children when they were making their closing remarks to this jury. The jury looking at the Farris children at times in the gallery. And it was also interesting, too, when I was talking about those bags being dropped, there were members in the gallery that were kind of startled by that, and a few of the jury members as well. It was very powerful.
Oh, I mean, smart, I think, Matt, in terms of the defense and coming up with a closing that they paid attention to. Now, you and I spoke about this. You were here on the anchor desk, and we talked about the fact that the defendant, Melody Farris, does not rise when the jury enters or exits the courtroom. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was something that we first talked about a couple weeks back, and it's something that we noticed right away. And then, you know, all of the courties online have been chatting about this and wondering why, because it appears that she's showing disrespect to the court and the jury that's going to be making the decision in her fate of whether or not they find her guilty of murder. Well, the defense attorneys took part of their time today from closing arguments to address why she doesn't stand.
I've been meaning to tell you this for weeks, and I can't tell you this. My client, you may notice that she does everybody else in the courtroom. They rise for you. They rise for the jury. We don't. Here's why. You are a jury of her peers. You're her peers. We're on the equal footing. The judge sits above us all as he represents the law, and we are all under the law. So when the judge walks in, the bailiff says, all rise, we rise for the judge. So I just wanted to explain to you, my client is not being disrespectful. I told her to do that because I so believe that we are equals. We are peers.
You know, it's something that we rarely see on court TV as a defendant, especially one that's out on bail, $250,000 bail since her arrest, not rise for her jury that is going to be deciding her fate. And we know that this particular defendant knows that optics matter. She dresses appropriately for court each and every day. She's back to wearing the pearls. It appears that she's wearing a wedding ring, and she also walks around in the well sometimes when the cameras aren't rolling, and she's wearing stiletto heels.
Well, really interesting, Matt, because I, too, have never observed a defendant doing that, and I think it was wise he addressed it. You wonder if he's been looking online or watching court TV to know people were commenting on it. Matt Johnson, is always great to have you on. Thank you for your great reporting. Now let's get you back into court for more of the state's rebuttal closing argument.
you had to run up to Walmart that morning. Could it be to restock on cleaning supplies? Is that why you didn't want law enforcement to know you went to Walmart? Or because you spent $450 on a credit card that you didn't have until you took it out of your dead husband's wallet? Both. She needed to wash those towels. She needed to Clorox that floor. She bought a lot of soap, a lot of bleach. And we know it was her because she bought wine and showed her ID. Let's talk about the truth of July 5th, 2018. Melody's actually the one who pointed out Gary's remains to Scott. And yet she's letting everybody galvanize around saying, Scott found him, Scott found him. That's not true. And she knows it. She's the one who told police also that corroborated Scott. I said, hey, did you put a goat in the fire? That was her pointing out the remains to Scott. Because if you don't have a body, you don't get the money. She had to be found. Melody actually knew the night before that the girls couldn't find him. Addison said that. She wasn't concerned. And yet she pretends like the morning of the fish, she didn't know he was missing. Melody only started looking when Amanda got there. She was sitting on the stoop, just like, hey, yeah, they can't find Gary. Okay, well, how long have you known about this? Actually, since last night. Well, that would be the wrong answer. That would make her suspicious. And when Amanda described the events on the 5th, boy, were those vastly different from everybody else's. The thing about it, and what got me, was she was like, well, nobody asked me. Weren't you told not to talk to the police? You were the one who didn't want to tell what happened. So then you live with your mom for 2 years and decide to tell what happened, and by then, you've been completely tainted. Scott testified he went to go look for the CPAP and the gun that he used for duck hunting to see if maybe he was out duck hunting. All those comments about a missing gun, that's not true. He didn't mention that until after he went in the basement, thought to look for that 38, saw it was gone. Then he came up and was like, oh, yeah, by the way, this 38's missing. He didn't mention a missing gun before that. Think about the source of all that information. That's Melody being vindictive and planting thoughts in her daughter's head. On the 5th, when you go back and you hear Melody's statements, on the 5th, man, she tried everything. Scott's health issues, suicide, Chris steals money. Here's the thing. Here's how it went down, okay? I have a picture of an octopus up there. Do you know what an octopus does when it feels threatened? It squirts ink in the water to escape. The closer she felt like she was getting into trouble, the more she felt threatened. She started spewing all this ink about her kids. She even talks about Chris Payne. He wasn't even in the state. I mean, she does not care who she throws under the bus to save herself. It is actually insane.
You know, this case is really one that has divided the community of Court TV viewers. We would love to know what you think. Are you buying what the state is selling? They get the last word. That's what we're listening to right now. Let us know your thoughts. We'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to get you back in right where we left off.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, 12 men and women unpack the Farris family drama as deliberations get underway in the burn pile murder trial.
Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV. On the next, interview with a killer.
You created the plan.
I didn't actually shoot her.
You did murder her, though.
Yeah.
So what's the difference?
Interview with a killer. New episode Sunday, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV. And important.
And back now to Georgia for more of the closing arguments in the burn pile murder trial for Melody Farris. Prosecutors say the mom of 4 shot and killed her husband, prominent Atlanta attorney Gary Farris, over the 4th of July weekend in 2018, and then burned his remains on their property. The defense, though, says no, Farris is innocent and that her son Scott was the one with the motive and the means. Let's get you back into court now for more of the state's rebuttal closing argument.
Reach. Scott likes to shoot guns. Okay. Chris takes money. Okay, well, he was in Buckhead, so this is going nowhere. And then the suicide. It's funny because she says, no, he wasn't suicidal. And then when she feels threatened, she's like, oh, well, yeah, no, he used to be suicidal before we got married. Once she realized that the jig was up, ooh, she was frantic. The only person she didn't throw under the bus was Amanda. Because she'll need one child to support her. She just needs one. It's all about what she wants, what she needs. It's not about anyone else. She prided herself on her house and her things. She liked her things. She wanted to keep her house immaculate. She talked about that. She decorated it to a T. Not my style, but, you know, to each their own. And yet, it was pretty dirty on the 5th. Let's talk about the blood. Don't forget that Deputy Riley walked in that house and there was a candle burning by the basement door. It's not a place for a candle to burn. And it smelled like bleach. We've got Gary's blood right there on that basement floor. The defense wants you to believe these are all different sources of different things. That's not reasonable. We've got a blood trail. And it goes from the top of those basement stairs, where that attempted cleanup is, down the stairs, into the basement. See that big bottom splotch? That's those stains right there on the left. That's blood. Those evidence markers that were Gary's blood, right along this trail. That's in the basement, in front of the bar. It is not reasonable to think that there is a legal justification for all of that. That's not reasonable. What's reasonable is that's a crime scene. Because we have a man who was shot twice at least, burning in the burn pile behind this house. To think otherwise is to seek doubt. And that is not your duty. means and opportunity. They had a lot of stuff. They had a lot of farm equipment. You know who's farm girl? Melody Farris. And she's, you know what? She gets it done. She's determined. She's self-sufficient. And you know what really motivates someone? Getting caught for murder. It wouldn't have been easy for anyone to move that body. Not Scott by himself, not Chris by himself. Anyone would have needed something. And you know what? It's okay if you all think different ways in which she moved his body. One of you could think she used the tractor. One of you could think she used the RTV. One of you could think she literally just got down and rolled him there. It was all downhill, you saw. One of you could think she tied him up like a deer to the back of the RTV and dragged him over there. But he ended up on that burn pile. And a ferry didn't put him there. A murder ferry didn't put him there. No one else. There is no evidence anyone else was on that property. And to think differently is to seek doubt. She was in good shape, people. She had no choice but to move him, or she would have been caught literally red-handed. She's not stupid. That's why we're here today. Now we're going to talk about guns. Scott doesn't have a pistol.
Let's bring in our experts for the next couple of hours. Criminal defense attorney Marie Pereira and Deputy Public Defender Philip Dubé, two of our viewer favorites that I'm so glad are on right now to weigh in, because I do think there's reasonable doubt in this case. I think there's evidence suggesting that the mother, the defendant, did it, but I also think there's evidence to suggest there's not enough of a connection and maybe one of the kids did it. Philip, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what allows for a third-party culprit type theory for the defense is Georgia law. All they have to show is that there's probable cause to believe that a third party committed it. And they don't have to just show motive, means, or opportunity, just probable cause, you know? And if the jury has probable cause, just like a prosecutor or even the court, that is reasonable doubt as to the identity of the perpetrator. But I think the defense did a fantastic job pointing to all the kernels of doubt. And the big one, obviously, is how on earth this diminutive petite lady would move such a tall, jolly green giant from wherever he was shot in the ribs onto that burn pile. I mean, you would have to believe that she's almost like an Annie Oakley and then a farmhand getting out on the Kubota tractor and lifting him up and just dropping him atop that fire pit. Now, I don't know if that would be reasonable to a jury. I think at best what a jury might think is that somebody was in on it with her. But I do think the problem that the defense has is that the cell data puts her and the husband, the victim, at the house at the time of the shooting and at the time he would have been put on that burn pile, and the son Scott was over an hour away, at least per the cell data. So it's one of those, it could go either way. You just don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. It could go either way. Now, I will say the defense did also point out in the closing, though, that their expert said there was no way that bullet could have caused the death. So you factor that in as well. Marie, the state on the rebuttal is again saying she liked her things. They're pointing to that motive of money. The problem I have with leaning too far into that motive is arguably it could be the same motive if the jury chooses to want to believe that one of the children did this.
Exactly, and I agree with you. Earlier today, Julia Janae said, you know what, the jurors have a lot to weigh in this situation. And I think the issue of his weight is a problem for the prosecution. And the motive is there, like you said, Judge Ashley, for everyone. Everyone wanted money. His son Scott was broke, living in a feces-decorated house with a clean bathroom. That created reasonable doubt, and they haven't proven it beyond a reasonable doubt. Just the fact that we're all sitting here like we're watching an episode of Scooby-Doo mixed with Perry Mason thinking who did it is problematic. They have not proven it beyond a reasonable doubt. And I love the way the defense used the bags of feces, because, not bags of feces, fertilizer. Because really it's symbolic that the prosecution's case is filled with biosolids, which is treated feces. You know, they fired shots symbolically. They did a great job with the delivery. And if it's storytelling, I'm buying the story of defense right now.
And I would agree with you, Marie. That was powerful. Philip, weigh in quickly, because not only did they have those bags of fertilizer, they were picking them up and dropping them on the floor and showing you how much each one weighed until it equaled the 320 pounds that we know the defendant weighed. Philip, your thoughts?
Well, it doesn't really matter if she used the Kubota tractor, to load him onto the burn pile. And that's their theory, because there was blood on it. But I think the one piece of evidence that really could sink her is the recorded statement that she gave to Rusty, where she called and said on the 3rd of July that Gary was on the burn pile, but the body wasn't discovered until the 5th by Scott. So how she knew 2 days prior to the discovery of the body could be her ticket to perdition.
Yeah, I agree with you. That is an important fact to weigh. All right, we need to take a break. I want everyone to be aware, though, the clock has started. We're bringing you all of the closing arguments in their entirety, so we're a little bit behind. The jury is deliberating. We're going to keep that clock up, so you can see how long they've been out. And we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get back in for more of The Rebuttal. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ashley Wilcott. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's turn now back to Georgia, where Melody Farris stands accused of killing her own husband. Prosecutors say at the time of the murder, the couple had been arguing about finances, specifically Gary Farris's refusal to give his wife Melody money and instead giving it all to their adult children. The defense, however, points to the couple's son, Scott, who was living on his parents' property, and they claim he is the real killer, also motivated by money. Let's go back in. We're listening to the state's rebuttal closing argument. Just a reminder, the clock is up because we are bringing these to you in their entirety, but the jury has started the deliberation.
She is a self-proclaimed not a bad shot. She told that to Terry. That means she's shot guns before. And remember, she's a farm girl. And a .38 revolver, pretty easy to shoot. Martha Jane. Ooh, they're mad about Martha Jane. She is, as Mr. Fogus said, God-fearing. She needed to do right with God. She's not gonna lie to you. She noticed that gun was missing after Gary's murder. And it's reasonable for her to think that we can put a gun in her hand for this murder. It's reasonable for her to think that. But it wasn't until she realized we didn't have a murder weapon, and she was like, oh, they need my help. I gotta say something. And it was in a leather holster. You know who that gives credibility to? Scott. We know he was shot at least 2 times. These were shot from the same gun. And no, they're not consistent with the 38 bullets found in Scott's apartment. They're just not. And they're not consistent with a .357 or whatever other gun they think may be involved. No. It's consistent with 38 special revolvers. Not .357. I'm going to talk about Melody's lies. She was interviewed by Sergeant Hayes and Sergeant Kuykendall. And when she was told that her husband of almost 39 years was shot, do you remember what her question was? Do you know what kind of bullet? That would not have even crossed my mind to ask. No suspicion. What do you mean he was shot? What? I thought he just. What do you mean? He had health issues. She's not worthy of belief. She lied to them about Ted Wiley. She lied to them about her phone. She lied to them about Rusty Barton, her XO tattoo, going to Jamaica with Rusty, Gary going out to eat on the 3rd. She never mentioned that. Because you know what? She was waiting inside that house with her gun, ready to confront him. She lied about going to Walmart. She lied about how much money I spent nothing. Man, profligate spending? I had to look that word up. She kept saying Chris booked a beach trip. No. She knew Gary booked that. But she wanted to blame Chris. Gary being on his deathbed, coughing up blood. Occam's razor, y'all. The simplest answer is the truth. The simplest answer in this case is where all this evidence points, and that is to Melody Walker Farris. It points to no one else. This is not a series of coincidences. She was not framed. She's not the unluckiest woman in the world. And again, there is not a series of justifiable reasons that explain her conduct. There's just not. And there aren't justifiable explanations to explain the evidence. July 24th, Rusty says, to law enforcement, she told me he's in the burn pile. She's arrested a year later, booked into Cherokee County. They have a jail call on June 24th, and whoop, on June 25th, he recants that statement. Y'all, there's Melody Farris for you. That manipulation. She knew Rusty was her Achilles heel in this case. She knew that. She had to shut it down. You know what she was really hoping? This is how she wanted it to go down. She knew the only way out of this marriage was murder. She knew that. I don't know why she thought that, but that is what she knew. Murdering the father of her children. She was hoping his body, being on that burn pile, would be chalked up to a health episode. She didn't think the sheriff's office would find that bullet in his rib. She just didn't. That's clear. She didn't think there would be blood left in her home. She didn't think anyone would be looking for it. She didn't think law enforcement would be all over that house. Well, we found it. And we kept digging, and we found more and more and more. We found out about your affairs, your disdain for your husband, your obsession with money and things and materialism. She never never once encouraged law enforcement to find the person that actually did this. She didn't think this is how any of this would play out. She manipulated her own mother to have an affair with Ted Wiley. She manipulated Martha to have an affair with Rusty. She manipulated Amanda to go with her to continue her affairs with Rusty. She manipulated Emily. She would go to Nashville to see Emily.
So two things. The theme of the rebuttal very clear. The prosecutor says no justifiable reasons explain the conduct of the defendant. Number two, you may notice that the deliberation clock is now gone. Well, that's because we've learned from our crew there at the ground that the jury deliberations have not yet actually begun, although the jury's been sent back, because they have to wait for all of the exhibits from the courtroom to be delivered to them to begin their deliberations. So as soon as that starts, we will let you know. In the meantime, let's squeeze in a break. We'll be right back here on Court TV Live.
Everybody is talking about Court TV's new hit series, Interview with a Killer.
Isn't there a part of you that just wants to talk truthfully about what actually happened?
Find out what viewers and critics are talking about.
Why would somebody do that?
Catch up on this must-see series on Court TV's YouTube channel.
Why are you here talking to us?
And watch a new episode this Sunday at 8 on Court TV.
Closing arguments are underway in the burn pile murder trial. Melody Farris is accused of killing her husband Gary and throwing his body on the burn pit, which was on their property. Right now, we are hearing from the state as they give their final argument to the jury, their rebuttal. Let's go back in.
She used Sherry Cooper to see Rusty. She used Rusty to try to get away with murder. She used Scott Farris to try to get away with murder. She used Chris Farris to try to get away with murder. And she used Gary throughout the entire marriage. She had the motive, she had the means, and she's the only one who had those, and she's the only one who had the opportunity. There is no evidence this was Scott. Mr. Fogus told you in opening we had to shrink the world. That's what he meant, and that's what we did. There is no evidence that she had help. That would make our job a lot easier. Her help was on the phone. It was Rusty Barton. There is no evidence it was anyone else. This evidence demands a verdict of guilty. Do not reward this criminal behavior. Do not reward her for almost succeeding in burning up her husband's body, unrecognizable to the point where doctors, forensic anthropologists cannot determine if any organs in his body had trauma. And no, you cannot tell me that there were no injuries on bones. Half those bones were gone. What you know is there was a bullet in his body and a bullet found in the basement with his DNA on it. And a gun that went missing from Martha Barton, who she had access to. She knew where that gun was. Do not reward her for almost concealing successfully the death the gruesome death of her husband. Hold her accountable. Melody was the only one who wanted him dead. She was the only one who would benefit from him being gone. She was the only one repeatedly betraying him. There are no games here. Murder is not a chess game. It is malicious. And Gary did not deserve this. The last thing he saw was staring down the barrel of a .38 revolver in the hands of his bitter wife, who was constantly betraying him. But this was the ultimate betrayal. Hold her accountable. You are the voice of Cherokee County in this case. You have the evidence to convict her beyond a reasonable doubt. We have proven it to you, and you have it. It's in the form of thousands of exhibits, testimony from the stand, audio, a lot of audio. If there is something you want to see or hear that you can't find back there, you send a note out to the judge. Do not reward her for being a smart criminal. You are the voice of Cherokee County that we do not tolerate this in this county. You do not get to shoot and mutilate your life partner. You don't get to take away the grandfather of your grandchildren. That is not your choice to make. The ultimate betrayal. Gary will not walk through that door. And that's because she took him off this planet. Find her guilty of all the counts in this indictment. The evidence and the law demand it.
All right, I want everyone in the audience to stay.
The ultimate betrayal. Gary will not walk through that door. Still with us, criminal defense attorney Marie Pereira and Deputy Public Defender Philip Dubé. How strong or not do you find the rebuttal made by the state in this case, Marie?
I still think, even with the rebuttal, who basically what they're saying is put aside your common sense, use your emotions, and make someone pay for it. This is still, in the spirit of Philip Dubé, a WDI, a whodunit. We still don't know who did it. And they're tapping on the emotions of the jurors, which shows a level of desperation. They're still not addressing the big elephants in the room. The big size of the man. How did she do it? They're asking the jurors to come up with the answers. Did she drag him? Did she roll him? And then they put up a sexy picture of her and said, oh, she was fit. They haven't reached the burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. They still have problems even after this very sort of effective rebuttal.
Philip, what did you think about the defense's in its closing argument really pointing out all the different things that could be reasonable doubt? Of course, they did the strategy with the fertilizer bags, number one, but then they said unanswered questions about where are the bullets, where's the gun, what about Scott's odd behaviors? And remember, he erased part of, let me rephrase, we don't know he did it. Somebody actually erased part of the trail cam. How did Gary die? These are all unanswered questions. Are those in and of themselves equal to reasonable doubt?
Of course they are, because when you look at the sum total of everything put together, it's more than just a kernel of doubt. I mean, this is just like an entire loaf of bread rather than just breadcrumbs. This is so much doubt, honestly, you know? And I'm a little surprised that the prosecutor in rebuttal didn't really home in on that missing 38 special that cousin Martha had. Remember, Melody was a frequent visitor at her home, and then one day, all of a sudden, cousin Martha's 38 is missing, and ironically, the authorities determined that a 38 was the weapon that shot at Gary. They didn't address it, and of course, that's not the defense burden. And cousin Martha was a pretty credible witness, frankly. She was wholesome, she was sweet, and frankly reminded me a little of the Quaker Oats man, you know, that everybody sees on that carton for breakfast, you know, very sweet. They didn't hammer it enough. But I will say the defense did a bang-up job with what they had, and I think she's going to go home.
They did do a bang-up job. I predict some long deliberations in this case. We'll wait and see. Marie Pereira Philip Dubé sticking around with us. Thank you for that. Coming up next, Matt Johnson joins us live for an update in this trial, the burn pile murder trial for Melody Farris. Stay with us.
Today.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ashley Wilcott.
And I'm Michael Ayala. We're both here today giving you your front row seat to justice, and we are in Georgia this afternoon where the jury is about to begin deliberating in the burn pile murder trial. Right now, all of the exhibits are being brought into the jury room, and I think there's over 1,000 of them. There's many exhibits in that case, and then they will begin their deliberations.
And sometimes courts do it differently. I just have to comment, Michael, and say, okay, ask if you want them, but this one's saying you get all the exhibits and then you start deliberating.
Yeah, no question.
All right, the mom of 4, Melody Farris, faces life in prison if she's found guilty of shooting her husband in the basement of their home and then burning his body in the yard.
But the defense says the 64-year-old wouldn't have been able to move her husband's nearly 300-pound body and say that her son, Scott, had a financial motive to kill his father.
And joining us now, Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson. Welcome, Matt. Thank you for joining us both. What were some of the takeaways now that we've heard the end of that state's rebuttal closing argument that stood out to you?
Yeah, such a powerful day here in the North Atlanta area in this courthouse at Cherokee County after 17, 18 days of testimony and 44 witnesses, and now they're finally getting those exhibits. And the fate of Melody Farris, this defendant, is soon going to be in the hands of this Georgia jury. The 3 Farris children also notably in the gallery today, Chris, Scott, and Emily. Noticeably absent was Amanda, who was a defense witness. They're all seated together for the first time. It was a packed courthouse as prosecutors told the jury that Melody hated her husband, Gary, and wanted to kill him for the money. Take a listen.
This is all the money she would get if Gary died accidentally. Add all those up. Okay, $4.15 million now. The defense wants you to believe she didn't know about it. Naturally, without a will, that house was hers. You cannot tell me she thought she was gonna be broke. It's ridiculous. Afterwards, it was always about money, money, money. Melody was demanding money. She was trying to get as much money as possible.
The Farris children nodding at times, breaking down at other points of testimony, or at least the closing arguments and remarks from prosecutors, especially when they said that Scott should not have been the scapegoat. He had nothing to do with this crime, but yet Melody Farris would do anything to save herself, including throwing her kids under the bus. Take a listen.
These are her children. But as you sit here, she is trying to blame them for this crime. Those are her kids. Let that sink in. She has thrown both her sons, a son-in-law, under the bus for this crime. The murder of her husband, who she betrayed the most.
The three Farris children, adult children, and also a lot of the other family members, mainly brothers of the victim, Gary Farris, who've been in the courtroom each and every day. Well, they're all together for the first time now that they're no longer under subpoena and all the evidence is in. So they're milling about the courthouse right now and just waiting to hear what's next and if we get word from the jury.
Now, Matt, you know, I was impressed by the defense's closing argument, but you never know how it's going over unless you're in the courtroom, which you were. So how did their closing go over, and what were some of your takeaways?
It was really powerful, Michael, and the demonstration that this attorney did, where he had huge bags of fertilizer and he placed them one by one into the well right in front of the jury box, and he slammed them down as he was trying to make a point that he was trying to poke holes in each of the case of the evidence by the state. And then he finally put them all on a tarp, and he was trying to demonstrate how the defendant, 120 pounds or so, and he is about 200 pounds, would not be capable of moving the body of her husband, who was more than 300 pounds and 6'5". Watch this.
But I think it starts to become clear why I'm doing this. Why am I dropping these bags? These bags are 40 pounds apiece. I've got a few more bags to go. But I want you to know that it starts to become very impossible when you add this up, that someone who weighs 120 pounds can move this. This is 320 pounds. I am 185 pounds. And that's all I have.
Yeah, members of the gallery, I'm seated in the back row, but a lot of people were jumping in their seat when that first bag hit the ground. It startled a lot of people because, again, you could hear a pin drop in this packed courtroom. And another interesting thing, very dynamic, that the defense team did was during their whole presentation, they had the words "not guilty" blinking up on the monitors in the courtroom.
Oh, interesting. Yes, Matt, it's fascinating to hear about these closing arguments. Now tell us, because we see the clocks back up, they've only been deliberating now actually 4 minutes. Tell us more about the jury deliberations, please, sir.
Okay, so this is not a sequestered jury. They have the ability to go as late as they want tonight, but that might only be until 9 or 10 o'clock. The judge is checking with court staff to see how late security can be here, but they'll close the front doors, mind you. They're going to be back behind closed doors. The bailiffs are going to check in on this jury at around dinner time, around 6 o'clock or so, to see how late they want to go today. And they also have the ability to come back tomorrow and they can just pick up their deliberations, but they're choosing to have a shorter day tomorrow because of the Halloween holiday. Here's what we know about the jury makeup. The 4 alternates were selected, so we have a split. 6 men and 6 women are the deliberating jury in this case. And again, we are told that all parties must stay near the courthouse in case there is a question or a verdict. They have to be here within 15 minutes.
All right, Matt Johnson, thank you so much for that report.